everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Feeling a little bit contemplative today. And I've just been listening to a preach about how well and how thoroughly and how beyond humanness God forgives, and using the context of Isaiah where he says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and as far as the heavens are from the earth, so high are my thoughts above yours. And then down the line, talking about Peter. Now, for me, Peter is my favorite. Peter is the dude that I most relate to. Peter talks without thinking. Peter is impulsive. Peter is hot-headed. Peter is respectfully the most unholy of the lot. Unlike John. John is the goody-goody in the nicest possible way. And the account of when Peter denies Jesus. And I got stuck on this part where Peter goes and says to Jesus, I will never, these guys can all abandon you. I will never. And yeah, it struck me again when the preacher's listening to the pastor goes and says that Peter says this in front of all the other guys, the rest of the dudes. And the thing that struck me is that it's the kind of thing I would most likely say as well, because I think I'm so loyal. I think I'm so, if I'm for you, I think I know myself so well. And a lot of us are like that, aren't we? We think we know our own boundaries, and we think we know what we will do in any given situation. And we are so convinced of ourselves. And I mentioned this mainly because somebody approaches Peter and he does his first, no, I don't know the guy. Second guy approaches Peter, and before he can even take a breath, a third person has approached him with, Jesus. And he's like, of course I don't know the guy. And I'm thinking, if I were, as Peter, if I was in his shoes, I would have been at that space thinking to myself, I swore to the Lord that I would never abandon him. So I'm not going to abandon him. I'm going to be here. I'm here. And also because I said I wouldn't abandon him so he can see me. And the reason I say this is because when he says the third time, the Lord turned around and looked at Peter. And those words, that line has always struck me so hard. That, oh no, Peter, oh no. And then poor Peter, I can imagine his heartbreak that he didn't even last the evening, didn't last the day, that he had been so vocal about it. And aren't we like that? Aren't we also the same, where we are so certain, we are so sure, I can, I will, I. And I used to think that Jesus saying to Peter that you will deny me was a rebuke. And I think in the context of grace, I think this was one of the ways where the Lord was showing the difference between grace and the law, because the law is I, because I must do something in order to get good. And if I do something, then it will go bad. So in other words, let's say I'm asking God for something, then I feel that I have prayed enough, I have fasted, I have worshipped, I have read the Bible, all these things that I think I should do in order to push God to then do the right thing by me, And poor Peter, there he was, valiant Peter, because I think he's pretty valiant, this guy, I think he had a bit of a, not a hero complex, but he was a bit of a hero, and if I remember, he was Andrew's brother, and I think he was the eldest of the whole 12. So he was probably the older brother, the one who was the firstborn kind of mentality, and who often went ahead before everybody else. So he already had that about him, there was that thing about him. And so this poor guy, he must have been so shattered when his loyalty was crushed like an eggshell, irreparable, within a short space of time, after such a big declaration. And he had every intention of keeping his word. He had not meant not to keep his word. And how many of us, our intentions are so good? And is it not why we often also use the cliche of the good intentions, that the way to hell is paved with good intentions? I mean, that's not biblical. Okay? But it's just to say that, every time we think we're going to do the right thing, we're going to do good, and then we don't, and then something in us collapses, something in us is not just damaged, like crushed, like that actual analogy that I give. And people have said, I've heard pastors say that Jesus turned around and looked at Peter and looked at him with love, and I don't recall that in any of the accounts. I just recall that Jesus turned around and looked at him. For me, initially, when I saw those words, I used to think, oh God, that meant that Jesus looked at him with accusation, or looked at him with an I told you so. I rather do like I prefer the looked at him with love, but also that looked at him with love made me uncomfortable, until I've just been learning more about God's forgiveness of our sins. When he says he forgave us totally and completely once and for all, that the sins, the factory, the sin factory was nailed to the cross once and for all. And if it was once and for all, guys, then that means that we really are no longer subject to sin, Our bodies might not be justified, I guess, if you can call it that. In other words, I'm not made righteous, which is why we keep doing things that we really don't want to do, and which, by the way, is a great indication of the work that God has done. When we feel bad about doing something we know we shouldn't have done, when we have a wrestle against something that we really don't want to do, whether it's an addiction, whether it's procrastination, but we know that, this is not how I want to live. This is not how I want to be. I can do better. I can be better. It's not a case of self-condemnation, but it's a sense of knowing that if I can do better, it means that in the Lord, I can do better, which is why we have that Philippians scripture. So back to Peter and this account with Jesus turning around. And it struck me that when Jesus turned around and loved him, as I've heard it preached, it made me uncomfortable, because for me, there was still that sense of, oh no, the failure, except if we think about the fact that Jesus knew he was going to the cross, knew everything. So he knew that Peter, he has no condemnation towards Peter. And that's what being forgiven by God means. He looks at us and he does not condemn us. He doesn't look at us. I mean, I've raised a child and I love kids, so I've been around kids a lot. And every once in a while, a child does something and you're like, you see, I told you not to do that. How often do we do that? I mean, it was much later in my poor son's life, bringing him up, that I learned the grace thing where, like, and sometimes I feel bad because I feel like I learned grace too late to be of any good use to him. And that I should not carry, because it's something that, first of all, does not belong to me because there's no condemnation for me. And also because my son is saved, therefore there is no curse over him. Whatever error I made is not held against me or against him. And it's a process, guys. The process that we've got to learn that when God looks at us, he doesn't look at us through the lens of what we've done. He doesn't look at our filth. He doesn't look at our dirt. He doesn't look at our error. He doesn't look at our mistakes. He doesn't look at our misjudgment. He doesn't look at our stubbornness. He doesn't look at all those things that we can call ourselves, not because we are accusing ourselves or condemning ourselves, but because we've seen ourselves do that. We've seen ourselves be those things, So I just wanted to encourage, as we go into the week, the rest of the week, whichever day you clock in on this, to let's view ourselves as Jesus viewed Peter. Because when Jesus turned around and he looked at Peter, who had indeed denied him, he didn't look at him with condemnation. And I am convinced of that, because if Jesus didn't look at condemnation at the woman who was caught, in something that a lot of us immoral would condemn, if he didn't condemn him there, if he didn't condemn that lady, then he didn't condemn Peter, because that's not the person he is. And also because further on in Paul writes, Lord, knowing the joy awaiting for him. I mean, he knew he was going to die. The cross, the pain and the humiliation and the shame of being stripped naked in front of strangers as a grown man before children and an entire village and strangers and Gentiles and all these people, and worse yet, your own creation, and they do this to you. It was not about that. It was knowing that thereafter, what he had gained for all of us, for he gained for those standing there, he gained for us afterwards. And I often ask God, not often, once in a while, I would say, what does this great forgiveness look like? I mean, the one who's been forgiven much loves much. And knowing myself, how difficult it is for me to forgive, because I don't forgive easily, because I'm like, I feel like if I forgive somebody, I'm giving them license to come again and do the same thing. And unfortunately, I've seen it happen, particularly with my family. You forgive somebody for something, and then they feel like, oh no, she forgave me for that, I can do it again, and they do, And so I have a hard time with that, and I'm learning. My brother is so easy to forgive. Good Lord, that guy! It's like it never even happened, So I don't know how he does that. And for me, it's still quite difficult. I mean, when somebody because for me it's a case of shattered trust, and my trust is not just, it's not like a break that you can then straighten out and then it's fixed again. For me, trust, when it's broken, it's shattered. And it's difficult thereafter for me then to look at you again with the same trust that I had before you broke my trust, So yeah, I've got issues. Yes, I do indeed. But anyway, so Jesus does not have issues, people. Jesus does not have issues, as we do. And my take on on this, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. I mean, he didn't even have to turn back. He didn't have to turn around and look at Peter. He could have just left Peter to, oh my gosh, the rooster crowed and figure for himself or whatever, But Peter knew the Lord's eyes, guys. He knew how Jesus looked at all of them. He knew the the warmth that was always in his eyes. He knew what Jesus looked like when he woke up. He knew what Jesus looked like when he was hungry. He knew what Jesus' eyes looked like when he turned around and looked at the Pharisees and said, "You brood of vipers." He knew that. And I believe that Jesus puzzled Peter a lot, because Peter, though a fisherman, I think was very much a warrior kind of guy. He was very gung-ho. When he said, even if these guys abandon you, I never will, he had just chopped some poor guy's ear off. He proved himself. He proved that he is the dude. And we often feel that we've got to prove ourselves. And I feel like the Lord, under the law, it says, prove yourself. But under grace, it's accept my proof. Mine as in the Lord's proof, Accept my proof. And the proof of Jesus is in he became poor that we might be rich. By his stripes we are made whole. When we go through that prophetic writing in Isaiah, all those things, the peace that we gain through him, that's his proof. And the way the proof doesn't work for us is in the same way that if a judge is provided with evidence and he, English is gone, what's the word now? Disregards it, discards it, does not believe it, then the proof is made useless and is of no use to the person it's meant to benefit. So let's take the proof of the cross. The cross is utterly, utterly complete work. It's an utterly, utterly complete work. And be careful of people who limit grace. Or be careful when somebody says limit is a license to sin. Be careful when people preach grace with a but. Because the cross is grace. We are saved by grace. We should live by grace. Yeah, so that's my contemplation for today. And yeah, thanks guys. I hope this helps. And thank you for listening. Thank you for listening, guys. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, till the next time, hey? Cheers. Thank you all.